here with Imtiaz Shams. Imtiaz is a tech entrepreneur, human rights activist, hello, and co-founder of Faith To Faithless, which you'll be familiar with, an advocacy group for so-called apostates, people who leave religion, specifically high control religions, in the case of Imtiaz's work, or cults. Imtiaz used his own experience to help apostates who suffer when they leave conservative religions. In 2012, he began creating underground railroad networks for ex-Muslims around the world. He's featured in all sorts of places talking about this, from the BBC's The Guardian to The Times, on Vice. In 2017, he was the first ex-Muslim. I'm amazed at this, but apparently he was the first ex-Muslim ever to speak in an Islamic conference. And that's partly because he believes, as we'll hear more about, I'm sure, that religious organizations are important in the fight to tackle discrimination against apostates, as important as secular organizations and wider society. And I'm very pleased to say he's also an active trustee of Humanists UK. Imtiaz, hello.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Hi, no, thank you for being here. I think we'll start really with what it was that inspired you to get into work supporting apostates.
Yeah, it was just personal. So I left Islam. I didn't know you could do it. You don't even begin to know what the challenges are, because if you don't even know that you can be something, which is in my case, someone who's left a faith that I was born into and I believed in, then you don't even understand what the challenges are going to be, in a way. And so the first challenges was just accepting myself, that I could exist. And that just sounded silly to me, to be honest, in retrospect. Like, it's ridiculous. There's 1.67 billion Muslims out there, and obviously tons of them leave, but there's been this call it sort of purposeful shaming and abuse and things like that of people like myself who leave, and the hiding that a kid like myself who grew up didn't even know I could do it. So that sort of trauma mixed in with me meeting other people, so people who are ex-Hasidic Jewish people, Ultra-Orthodox who've left, or they're Jehovah's Witnesses who leave, and them going, wait, we've had similar experiences to you. And I'm going, what's going on that so many people think that they're the only one? And even if they know there's other people, they're facing huge traumas, as extreme as death. They kill themselves, they get killed, and as lightweight as having your children taken away, or emotional abuse for decades. You can't talk to your parents, for example. So all of that stuff mixed in with service providers just not knowing what to do with us, sometimes replicating the abuse, mixed in with people, some of these religious organizations are hyper powerful. They're cults, or they're just large organized religions, lots of money, lots of lobbying power. So you can imagine that basically no one really listens to us. So with Faith To Faithless, it was a stepped approach. First, can I make sure that people like me don't go through what I went through and what other people like me went through? And the second was, can we then start to instruct and support the social services and that to do better? And the third is trying to, David versus Goliath, versus the big religious organizations. Can we make sure that the public, the general public, understands some of what we go through, so that they don't support the religious organizations, which is often what happens. They might say, why are you talking about Islam? It's Islamophobic. Or why are you talking about Ultra-Orthodox Jews? It's anti-Semitic, as a way to stop these conversations. So sort of three-pronged, and it's very much started on a personal journey, but it became much bigger than me very quickly.
We'll come back to some of that work in the course of this evening, I'm sure. But sticking with the individual experiences that you talked about, it sounded like you were almost suggesting that there are stages that people go through on this journey to be an apostate, and to recognize yourself as someone who's not religious, and then to leave. Is that right? I mean, and is it true that, as you say, the first stage is really just even understanding that it's possible?
Yeah, absolutely. What's also really interesting is how the stages differ, faith to faith. So as an example, Terry Sullivan, who's a fantastic volunteer for us as well, and she's with Faith To Faithless a long time, and will say with Jehovah's Witnesses, often you leave and you don't want to leave. You get kicked out of the church, right, and then you figure out you're an apostate. I think with Islam, it's a little bit different. It tends to be that you leave kind of in your head. But that journey is very personal and very isolating. There are stages. So I think in my case personally, and I've seen this a lot with ex-Muslims, first stage is something's wrong if you don't agree with some of the morality, or something's wrong and you can't put your finger on it. Then you realize, actually, I don't believe in this anymore. Then you find other people and you're angry because you're like, how is it that we're all suffering? Like, how is that possible? And then you might even go public, like many of us, like me, went public and we said, I don't believe. That comes with a whole bunch of repercussions. So you're dealing with that, and there's a bit of an anger phase sometimes, not with everyone, but with a lot of people. And then you might have a bit of a consolidation phase. Maybe you start talking to your family again, they start talking to you. There's a bit of repair. And eventually, and I think I'm in this phase now, is where it's one facet of your identity. Sometimes it's no longer part of your identity, but generally it is. Generally, you're saying, I'm a father, I'm also an apostate, I'm LGBT. It's multi-hyphenated identities, like Riz Ahmed calls them. It becomes part of that. So I think it's a bit difficult for people when it's the core of their identity, because you're still connected to that trauma. And generally people get past that. You need to get past that if you want to heal, I think.
What are the pressures that stop people from that keep people held back in the phase where it's just in their head? So what are the pressures in your experience that make it impossible to say it out loud?
The answer to this is going to be both gendered. It's going to be based on also your sexuality and your concept of gender. Also, race and class play a role in this. So, for example, if you're from a Muslim background and you're a man, your experience might be different from if you're a girl wearing hijab, for example, or if you're gay or straight, or if you're from a working class white family in Plymouth versus, so that is so just to caveat that, but I mean, as an example, the biggest thing is family shunning you, shaming you, and physical violence. That's an obvious, straight to the point, extreme one.
The worry about it,
but also the actual physical violence. I mean, just actual. Right. And what's really interesting is the violence and abuse is quite fluid. You don't have to be very overtly apostated outside to still get abuse. For example, if you're a girl and you're not getting married, or you're starting to show a little bit of neck or something, you don't have to have come out as an apostate to get punished for that, right? For example, in my case, just leaving home was a big thing. It takes away from some of that control that was punished as well in some ways, which now they're okay with, but at that time that wasn't kind of where it was at. If you're LGBT, you might live a double life for 10 years, and the worry is your family will disown you. There's obviously physical violence as a risk, but we actually try to steer away from talking about physical violence only because that's an obvious one, especially for people from a Muslim background. You then ignore the mountain of abuse, like, Jehovah's Witness would say this sometimes. Ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, they'll say, they would actually, it was a Bengali asylum seeker, ex-Muslim, who said this once. He listened to Jehovah's Witnesses telling their story and he started laughing and said, in our religion, we're scared about being killed. In you're scared about killing yourself because of the abuse you face, So the type of traumas are a bit different, but there are just certain patterns, and the fear tends to be familial and communal. Very different if you talk to an ex-Muslim living in Iraq, as you can imagine.
Sure.
You have a state-sponsored violence.
Exactly. Yeah.
But in the UK, although in the UK, there's also a fear of communal violence. So, for example, if you're from a ultra-Orthodox community, you might be worried about your community seeing what you're doing and then you getting kicked out. Or in the case of people from my background, actually, like my uncle's a taxi driver, he might see me not wearing hijab, and then suddenly I might have an honor violence issue, So even if the state's not involved in the UK, you're worried about that. All the time we hear about girls going to their doctors and being very worried about the doctor who's being actually they do this. The doctors might be religious Muslims and saying, oh, you're having sex, aren't you? And there's a worry that I'll go feedback to your family. If your family find out that you're having sex and you're a girl or even a guy, that can be very dangerous, right? So
in your own experience, your own personal experience, what were the worst aspects of those moments for you?
The worst wasn't even the family and the community, actually. It's just the lack of knowing what I am. Like, I can't explain. Like, you have a very strict social hierarchy and a view of the world. My view of the world is Islam is correct. Everything is viewed from that prism. And suddenly, none of that is real. And then who am I? What does that mean? How do you freeze, you don't know what that means. So you don't know And what's really funny, and I think a lot of humanists will reflect this, is, but you just keep living your life then. You just realize, wait a second, actually not everything is based on religion and you can just live your life. But at the time, no one tells you that. So you're just stuck, you're in stasis. After that, once you've started to consolidate that a little bit, it becomes the ritualistic aspect of living at home. You're being forced to pray all the time. If you're Ultra-Orthodox Jewish, you might have kids, you have to go rabbinic studies, you want to actually allow your kids to do other things, you can't do that. It's a lot of that. And then it also becomes, oh, but what's my future going to look like? My parents are going to kick me out, or they're never going to talk to me. And a lot of our apostates have so much love for their family. What the irony is, the irony is the religious groups will often say, you're doing this as a fu to your family. No, the reason we don't come out is often because we love our family. We can't move, So I think it reflects a lot if you speak to people from the LGBT community and what they often have gone through.
It does sound similar, doesn't it? It's a similar process, similar fears, similar barriers to actually making the steps. But you think it's as necessary? You think it's necessary for people to do it?
Oh, it's I had to be very careful early on to try to recommend to people to come out and come out, as apostates. And in fact, I was involved with other people telling their families well before I did it. And that tension inside me really hurt me a lot, because I was like, I can't do that. That's not fair. How am I in the secret and living a double life, and these people are telling their families and I'm giving them advice? And so one of the biggest reasons I came out to my family is that I just realized it was ridiculous. However, it's so incredible to see how the world has changed. Ex-Muslims wasn't the thing it is now. You go on TikTok, you see people talking about ex-Muslims, it's crazy. It existed, but it was very activisty and political. Now it's very normalized. It's like, we all know ex-Muslims in the Muslim communities. Everyone's talking about it. It's a thing. And that only happened over a 5-6 year period. So the truth is, the hypothesis that was had at the time, which is we all need to come out and come together and not have figurheads, but have just lots of us coming out, worked. It really works. And it has to happen in the West, because what are you going to do? If you do that in Bangladesh, which people have done, well, we know what's happened there. So if we're not doing it, that's an absolute waste of potential. So
you think the obligation is social as well as personal? You've got an obligation.
I have to be really careful to say that, because coming out as an apostate is so much trauma. I don't wish it on anyone, but I think that fear is often unfounded, because in the long term, apostates have better lives when they're true to themselves, as long as they're safe. And that's just I think it can be defended. Like, if you look at the lives of apostates anecdotally, my life is so much better now because I'm out and open, and I have a relationship with my family. I have friends who are Muslims. I have friends who are not Muslims. It is better. And I have just an internal compass that doesn't require a lie,
At this stage, I want to remind everyone that the question field is open. You can put your questions here for answer to Imtiaz. I think you just go to the Q&A box and it is possible to do that. So tell us a bit about the practicalities of starting Faith to Faithless. What was it that you did first of all?
So pre-Faith to Faithless, the first thing was me being like, I'm the only ex-Muslim. Then me going like, wait a second, there are things called, well, I didn't know it was ex-Muslim. I thought it was like, I was weird. And then you come across the term ex-Muslim, and then you go online, and then you wait, there's tons of us. There's hundreds of us online. It was literally hundreds at the time. And it was on Reddit. That now, by the way, that forum is now 97,000 people as of, it's starting to catch up with the Islam subreddit, just FYI, it's so much fun. But at the time it was hundreds of people. And I remember going, there's all these people and we're talking to them, but I don't see any of them, And so I try to meet them offline. I remember the first person I met was a bisexual ex-Muslim man from Coventry or something, who took the train down from King's Cross to meet me, because I was more out on the forum. So I was shaking, he was shaking, it was terrifying.
Yeah.
And that first meeting, it was like the crack cocaine that kept me going. So since then, I've just constantly been meeting other ex-Muslim and then other apostates. We set up a bunch of groups, very informal grassroots stuff off Reddit. In the UK, in Australia, I set one up. My friend set some up in Canada and America. That was very informal. They then became organized. So the American organization became a charity, Ex-Muslims North America. Faith to Faithless was kind of its own ad hoc thing, which then, obviously with Humanists UK, that's then become a part of a program. And, in a way, at the time, I was only able to focus on the outreach because, like I said, there was plans to do social work type stuff and also institutional change. I didn't have the resources. I didn't know how to, I couldn't do that. What I could do is YouTube. That's what I knew. I knew how to film stuff.
And that's where it started, really, wasn't it?
Yeah. It's just us being in, people were always very confused. Like, how do we get the spaces? Well, we had to haggle that. I had to talk to the university societies, and actually no one would take us. The feminist societies didn't take us. The LGBT societies rejected. The only people that took us were the atheist secularists. It was, they called ASH at the time.
Yeah, that's right.
Only people who would take us. They were the only people who would take us. No one would allow us to have their venues. So it was really amazing that we were able to do that, and that then kicked off into what Faith To Faithless sort of became.
So that was really about building awareness and reaching either people who were potential apostates or who were already apostates and wanted that support.
Yes, exactly.
And then what was the next step? So you mentioned that there was you wanted to spread broader awareness in other parts of society about apostasy issues too.
Yes,
was
exactly.
This was something you did before you joined up with Humanists UK, or did it really happen after?
It was just before. So what happened is I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was an ex-Ultra-Orthodox Jewish boy, and we were in my living room in Caledonian Road at night, 2 a.m., because we had just so much sharing and emotions. And it turned out our families were exactly the same. We had exactly the same family, like same problems, same issues. And I was like, oh man, this is like bigger than me and bigger than the ex-Muslim thing. Because up till then, I was very ex-Muslim, everything, And so Faith To Faithless then started doing events that were cross-apostate. And, we did a couple of other events like that. And that's when the Humanists UK stuff happened. So it's kind of very overlapping. It's very funny. I say that I don't say this very publicly very often, but I didn't know what humanism was for a really long time. And I think one of the big things was that I knew I was a humanist, but I didn't know what that meant. Does that make sense? I mean, you see this even with non-apostate. Very common, right? Yeah. And with apostates, you see the same thing. They're all basically humanists. Like, a few of them, well, a decent chunk might become other types of religions, but even those apostates tend not to become more extreme. They tend to be more like, less, not as evangelical or whatever it is. And then, so there was that kind of move from the ex-Muslim work into the Faith To Faithless work, which is broader. And that was still outreach at the time. It's just pre-Humanist UK. It was very outreach focused, very YouTube videos, things like that. I had my own YouTube channel also giving people advice that did quite well. I never got into the theology on purpose. No. I was just like, many people talking about theology. You know what?
That's interesting, isn't it? But that was not interesting at all for you.
Andrew, you know me. I love theology. I'm obsessed with it.
But it wasn't the transforming moment when you realised you weren't a Muslim. It wasn't intellectual and theological, was it? Or was it? It was.
It was both. It was very both. I grew up obsessive about theology and science and all that. I just made them work together very nicely. Well, not clearly not.
Temporarily.
But the reason I don't talk about theology is that's not what apostates needed, right? Like we didn't need another person, another voice piece to talk about Islam. There's lots of people doing that, right? We needed people out there who are saying, hey, I'm an ex-Muslim, like, let's talk, right? And so against my natural instinct, which is like, I love theology, I love debating, I've never done anything theological, ever.
You mentioned, since we were talking about Humanists UK a moment ago there and humanism, you mentioned once to me that you thought that it was good for apostates to have Humanists UK because it might help speed through the angry phase and into the sort of like normal living my life positive phase. Is that an accurate, fair representation?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there was a natural overlap because I would see apostates at humanist events. But what's really interesting is they would hunt me. They would come up and they would do a beeline towards me and say, I've been a humanist for 30 years. And like, there's a man, I can't remember who he is. He's like a elderly sort of ex from a Sikh background.
I know.
You know how I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And, they would beeline to me and say, I've been humanist for a really long time, but I've never seen this happen. And then they would tell me this life story about their mom and their dad and all that. So there was always a natural flow, but I felt like it wasn't really integrated very nicely because had I known the concept of humanism, I would have maybe had more tools to think through some of my problems, if that makes sense. It just took me a longer time maybe and bumbling around a lot. So I did definitely think that. My kind of view is, with apostates is that one thing about apostates is you cannot control them. That's by definition. Like you've seen a 1.8 billion people religion try to control someone who said no. there's no way you can make them do anything, right? So humanism is quite nice for that, because it's a bit like, well, it's a group of people who by definition,
oh yeah, we can't make people do anything. I mean, like, some people, sometimes when I'm at meetings like of other NGOs or even with religious groups, and they're like, oh, we will tell our followers to do this, and I think, I wish I could tell humanists to do something. It's
exactly right. Yeah, you'll get an email from some person in the middle of
saying this is not the right thing that you told us to do.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, I thought that was a nice second run for apostates to move away from some of the pain and the anger. But I feel the same about, let's say, Sunday Assembly. A little bit weird, but actually could be useful, the
for Unitarian, people who want it,
yeah, for people who want it. I wanted to give apostates a whole bunch of options that I had myself been exploring. I mean, for example, I have no problems with like people exploring religious stuff. Like I've looked at Buddhism stuff. I've looked at, you want people to experience, but a lot of apostates are vehemently non-religious, to the point where some of them are anti-theistic. So humanism is an obvious thing for many of those kind of people to go to without having that internal angst that comes with being constantly hyper-focused with their ex-faith.
There's a question here from Toby saying he's very shocked that LGBT groups and other groups effectively shunned you in the early stages. Is that the case? And is that still the case? Maybe tell us a bit more about what it was like then and how it is now.
Oh, hell yeah. Like, oh my God.
You're not saying it's still the case now.
It's still the case now. Of course it is. Yeah.
I thought it was much more normalized now. Surely.
It's normalized now, but I have that's because of Humanists UK. Like the problem is that look at honor violence. Let's forget about apostasy. Right. Something simpler. Honor violence in the Sikh and various Pakistani, Afghani communities in the UK. It took 10 to 15 years for Karma Nirvana to go from being a 16-year-old girl setting up a charity to now having forced marriage bills. If you speak to them, they will tell you single
institution. People might not know. So that's an organization that works with people who have survived and
honor violence
to avoid honor-based violence. Yeah.
Everyone rejected them. Everyone. No one would talk to them. People shunned them. They said this is racism.
It's fear of being racist.
So many of things like that. Yeah. With us, it's with us for the ex-Muslim portion, it's racism. With the ex-Ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, it's anti-Semitism. With the ex-Jehovah's Witness, it's that the Jehovah's Witness organization is quite litigious and very powerful. And same thing with Scientology and these kind of things. So, you have different challenges with each one. But this is where the trick of apostasy versus ex-Muslim is valuable, because you then can't say, well, you're being racist. Well, we've got loads of white people who have left their faith and they're having similar problems. Or, if you're saying this is anti-Semitic, well, I'm not a Semite. Like I'm from a Muslim background. I'm telling you, I have the same problems. So you make it very difficult for people to challenge you in that way. But they still do. I mean, I'll tell you, student societies, we had, I won't say which one. Yeah. I won't say which one. There was a feminist society that I had helped by getting a Muslim speaker in for them. And as part of that, the founder of that society wanted to get us in, to do an all-female panel. Cancelled on us and told us it was because there was a Muslim person on their panel, and I don't even believe this, by the way. There's a Muslim person in the panel that said that this would be racist. What's racist about women talking about leaving their faith? It's ridiculous. Like, I'm brown, you can tell I'm I think minority, but it's not about racism. It's not about protecting people from a Semitic background. It is about replicating the shame and shun culture.
Yes.
A lot of these religious
those norms and those taboos on wider society. I mean, we get that as well, of course, like whenever we do our work on illegal schools, or even sometimes on faith schools. And you get it from every direction, really. You get it from left-wing people, right-wing people. I know there's a sort of, there's an idea that somehow it's left-wing people in Britain who are particularly keen to sort of cry Islamophobia whenever there's a discussion about legitimate human rights issues on apostasy or anything else. But my experience is that it's broader than that, really, that there's a whole, you never know where this false charge is going to come from, because it can come from anywhere direction. Exactly.
And with the way that social media and things like that work, you need one person to say something and it might create a wave that means you get shunned.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, we're all shunned. So we then come into the world hoping that people who are not from our background will love and accept us and promote the fact that we need rights. And these people, because by the way, many of us are gay, lesbian, and obviously women who are feminist and men who are feminist. And yet those are the groups that shun us.
You
and
get double
replicate that
shunned.
violence. Imagine how that, it's one of the most disgusting things I think I've ever faced in my life. And I've been through a lot. It is, but I think it's getting harder to do that. So now they can do this in soft ways where they withdraw, but they can't do it publicly. They used to do that. So they used to be like, things that people would say on Twitter, but we've been able to come hard on them because what are you going to say to me? If you're talking about racism, what are you going to say to me? I grew up in Saudi Arabia. I grew up in East London. What are you going to say to me about racism? Like we've got people who are Black, Christian background, left the faith, they've faced everything you can imagine in the UK. What are you going to say to them about racism? So
and I think that the involvement of Humanists UK has helped with that at all. I mean, quite a bit, don't you?
Oh, because you guys are really good at writing letters. I don't know how to do, I don't have that machinery behind me. We don't have that machinery behind us. You guys have spent a lot of time being, if I remember correctly, one of the previous governments have said this about you, that you're very efficient when it comes to creating a megaphone for people who don't have.
It was the coalition government. I think it was said with resentment rather than praise.
I take it as praise, to be honest.
I suppose so.
I
suppose so. And one of the things that Faith To Faithless has been doing as part of Humanists UK, and Teddy, who's just left us as our Director of Community Services, was particularly keen on this, is training people from public sector agencies, from third sector bodies as well. I mean, we've trained people from Metropolitan Police, from government bodies, from advice charities providing, mainstream advice, training everyone from those agencies in the specific issues that affect apostates. And I think we've trained something like 400 people now from different agencies, which is a huge number. And every single asylum officer in the country as well, through our work with the Home Office, we've trained in recognising and appreciating the issues that apostate refugees and asylum seekers experiencing. So it must be more than a few hundred now as well. That must surely help to try to eliminate the prejudice, but also prevent the allegations of racism.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember one of the, just changing the details slightly, a girl contacted us who was under the age of 18. So whenever that happens, you signpost directly to one of the charities. She was signposted to a charity. She wanted to take the hijab off, basically. That charity, the volunteer said, maybe you should return back to your faith, right? And I remember Teddy was incensed at that. Like, I remember at the time I was incensed. He was at that. And, we worked with that charity and, steps we're taking in the training program partly came off on the back of these kind of issues. The great thing has been just how normalized the training program has become. Like initially, I remember people were a bit funny about it. It's a new thing. Yeah. Now it's like Metropolitan Police do it. Like, it's a normalized. And the good thing with these things is, once the infrastructure is there, they just keep growing. You're not going to go back. You're not going to roll back in time. These training programs now get picked up every year. So there's a new cohort of people who are trained in apostasy, etc. Yeah. I have to say, it is also one of those things that, unfortunately, it's not as sexy as YouTube videos, but it's probably more impactful. Like this is
your YouTube videos are very impactful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But in different ways, and I have to be honest, like I think apostates, including myself, many of us are so vulnerable and don't have professional backgrounds, which means that actually setting up anything that would look like this would be very difficult for us anyways.
Yes.
And I mean, in my case, I have a professional background also, but even then how do I know how to contract Camden services? So that's been one of my favorite, and I say this to my friends, if I die, what has gone before me? And one of them is that there's infrastructure, like it doesn't need me. I can go and it's all good. It's working, and it's a real pride that I have in what's happened as an output of this.
Good. And I think it's become quite mainstreamed in Humanists UK as well. I mean, it's, when we're having a conversation now about a program or an activity, we will routinely, in ways that we didn't in the past so much, think about, well, what's the apostate experience in that? How do we, we've got some questions about that here. So let's come to those. First of all, there's some more questions about you. So, Saiful Islam, who I think, unless there are two Saiful Islams that we know well, is probably our great patron. Oh, he is. He's from sunny Bath. He says he lives in Bath, of course. One of our patrons, also an apostate from Islam, of course, is wanting to know, what age was this that you did leave Islam? What was the first reaction from your parents and close family? And was there anyone in the family that was surprisingly supportive? So when was it and what was the reaction?
Yeah, so it was when I was 7 years old, I remember reading the Riyadh al-Salihin. It's a book of hadith, of sayings of the Prophet, and reading a couple of hadith on one of the wives of the Prophet, Aisha, playing with dolls and, being quite a young age. And me going, wait a second, I'm that age. Something's off here, but being too young to know how to process that. And as you get older, these questions have answers to them. Religion is very good at having answers. But as you get older, the answers for me just stopped making sense. Like, you could just tell some of this just wasn't correct, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think by the age of about 18, 19, I had to get out of my community, but I didn't blame religion for that. I just knew I needed to see the world. By 21, 22, I had checked out. And by 23, I had done a big, I'm going to go look at my religion again and really try to find the truth of it. And I just left it. So it was about 23. So it was quite late in my life, I would say.
And the reaction from family and parents and close family at the beginning? And
there was no reaction because they didn't know when I told them. Eventually, just because things are a bit repaired, without going into too much detail, pretty traumatic for everyone involved.
Right.
And I had to leave. There's a lot of things like that. The problem isn't what happened then. The problem is that it's constantly re-traumatizing. So things might be going good for 1 year, and then suddenly it's back to 4 years ago, Really? So it's that, and it's not just, I'm really lucky. I have a relationship with them, and generally speaking, they're chill. There's a lot of stuff, but they're chill. I did have some family members that were surprisingly supportive. However, some of them have become the opposite.
Oh, right.
It's really interesting.
This is an up and down situation.
It's the problem. It creates no stability. So what that means is, for apostates, often they cannot rely on family whatsoever, and they have to find family elsewhere. I'm very lucky. My family are quite kind people, so it's very tricky. Religion makes very kind people do weird things and all that stuff. So it's an absolute minefield. But I think in the long term, it's going to be consistently like this, so consistently up and down, but at least within bounds.
You can't be the only apostate in your first apostate in your family. I mean, Bangladesh has some real pockets of very secular culture.
We are not. No. My family we are very religious, politically religious. It's complicated in my family.
Yeah. Okay, well, moving on from that. More generically then, which, if there is one in your experience with this program, is the most difficult religion to break away from? Oh, that's probably a question.
That's a really good one. Yeah, that's a very good one. I have to say, ex-Muslims are not jealous of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. Because at least with us, we have very strong family networks. So your family in the end might accept, probably will accept you. With Jehovah's Witnesses, they have the loving provision, which means that the family has to cut you off. Yeah. Otherwise, they get apostated as well. Yeah. And so you see these horrific letters with tears on them from the mothers to the children, saying, I love Jesus, so I have to cut you off. We don't, we get that in ex-Muslims as well, just as a percentage issue. But with Jehovah's Witness, it's a huge percentage.
Sure. It's an obligation on them.
It's an obligation. Yeah. I mean, leaving Ultra-Orthodox Jewish faith is also very, very difficult because they can often come after your children and they take your kids off you. And if you've got children and you love your children, I cannot imagine anything more traumatic than that, So I think leaving Islam is very difficult in countries. There's nothing harder than leaving Islam and being someone who lives in Iraq. Sure. You'll just have to leave to the West or something. So it's Jehovah's Witnesses, not jealous of them.
Coming back to the question of anger, one questioner says here, I left it, well done, they say to you, so that's good. I left the Church of England over 30 years ago and was so angry about the time I'd wasted on such nonsense. Any special advice to new apostates on this sort of anger?
So if it's anger, if you've just left?
Oh, this sort of anger of being looking back and being angry about the fact that I suppose sort of lost opportunities or
absolutely. I remember I met one of my close friends' fathers who was 72 at the time, and he was an ex-7-day Adventist, and his wife was also left as well. And later that night, he came to me like sneakily and like started talking to me, and basically he was traumatized. He hadn't dealt with it, and he's a 72-year-old man who was a minister for 30 years. You know, he's asking me for advice, and I'm like, I'm a child. I'm like 27 years old at the time.
And what did you say?
I said the first thing is to meet other people like yourselves. So the fact that he could meet me and felt safer with me than his wife, you know, tells you something about the fact that we need people to talk to. So you know, Humanists UK with Faith To Faithless, we do the peer support stuff, we do the socials. Actually, it's amazing. You go there and you meet people, and you don't have to talk about apostasy. You talk about anything else, but you just feel safe because you're like, I know that this person understands my language and what I'm talking about. That's the biggest thing, really, really the biggest thing, because, you know, you have a safe space to share your traumas, but eventually you get bored of it. Like, you don't want to talk about it all the time. And then you move on to, oh, do you want to go get drinks or dinner or something? You know? And so that is the big one. I think philosophy matters a lot, and positive philosophy. So humanism, for me, I went to 2 Sunday assembly events. Not for me, but I did feel like, oh, wow, I know that that's there. It just helped me know that exists. You know,
it was affirming.
It was affirming. Exactly. I also just think getting past, like, just doing other stuff. Like, I did improv drama. I did salsa dancing. It was life-changing for me.
Right, because there's a whole world that opens up, actually.
Yeah.
So one of the questions here is, could you talk more about your view on the wasted potential if you don't come out as an apostate?
Oh, yeah.
What examples bring that to life? What examples bring that to life? Dance, music, these are some of them, perhaps.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example. I used to love playing the piano when I was a kid, like not properly, I was like just playing with it. But my piano teacher thought that I was talented and wanted to give me free classes after school. I couldn't do that. You know, and I'm now really shit with musical instruments, you know, and I'll probably never get that good. So I can see that. I will twist it around, and I often use this when I speak to people. The best thing that ever happened to me is the sheer trauma I faced leaving Islam, because it's made me slightly weird. Like, I built companies, I built charities. Like, why would I do that? I'm not built like, it's a trauma. It's a response to trauma. Terry, you look at Terry from the Jehovah's Witnesses, or Steve, you know, they're so talented. They're not that way because of a cushy life. Terry was not, you know, she'll say this herself, she was out on the streets at 16. That builds trauma, but it builds a certain type of oomph that puts you potentially above other people in terms of skill sets that you pick up. So I always try to, you know, and it's a bit bullshit sometimes, because sometimes the mental health is gone, you shot, so you can't actually do the thing.
So it's cold comfort to say this to some people.
It's cold comfort, but I have seen it time and time again. Like Alom Shaha, ex-trustee, you know, he's gone through some of that stuff. He really, like, you know, you get certain types of people. And so one thing that's happened with me is with Faith To Faithless, I've always tried to spend time with people also thinking about what their talents beyond might be. So, you know, like, maybe they're quite good potential entrepreneurs, maybe they're great dancers, singers, you know, and trying to push that, because the insecurity that comes also with this potential for talent, because you're just, you know, the fire that's made you, that you've been heated in, gives you a zest for life that not everyone has.
Question here, given that many people don't know they are humanists, as you've said, and many people say, how do you think we can make people more aware of humanism itself, particularly within more enclosed communities? It's a good question.
So how do you get to, how do you talk about humanism? Yeah. I don't think it's that hard, actually, because I think every single religious community is hyper obsessed with apostasy, because they want their people not to know about it, but they need to let you know not to know about it. And then naturally, and all religious people have questions, will question it, and they'll naturally watch a couple of videos here and there. You know, you always have like a sneaky video. That's work with apostate. And this is what's happened. Like, think about it. It's with Faith To Faithless being in Humanists UK, by definition, the sheer number of apostates that come to humanist stuff, like there's been, I mean, I know apostates myself who are going to have humanist weddings coming up, you know,
right.
And, you know, like the number of apostates at events, just anecdotally, I've seen that go up quite a lot. If you go to the AGMs, there's always a contingent of apostates that come in from the different ex-Muslim groups and the Jehovah's Witnesses groups. So just the integration with apostasy will get it into the communities, because we're better than you at doing it, if you can imagine, right?
You've got some encouragement here from the questioner who asked about life. He said, don't give up on the music. I've learned to play recorders and the accordion since I retired. Sociable instruments, so carry on.
Absolutely, yeah. I've fallen into the position where I love to support other people who are musicians now.
You're more of a patron of the arts.
Patron, yes, exactly. With no money,
nice.
yeah, but
yeah, but with no money, just encouragement. A couple of questions here quite similar. If not theology, what was it that gave rise to your doubts? Although I think you said it was a bit theology. And then a similar question: what was it that made you finally reject religion?
Yeah, so theology was a big part of it, and I definitely huge core part of it. Because I'll tell you why. If I wanted to live, if I wanted to date people or do this or drink or whatever, I could do that as a religious Muslim. As a Muslim, I would just be a Muslim who's, like many Muslims, having trouble with their faith. That's as normal. It's understood. Mm. Questions around theology, like leaving theology, not understood. So that was the big thing for me. So it was just the issues with morality. I remember, like, for example, I'm a man, but I remember just being very uncomfortable with how Islam's relationship with women was theologically. And that was a big bone of contention for me. Also the LGBT, like how that was dealt with. A lot of science stuff as well. So, just being obsessed with science. And Islam went through a phase where there was a lot of like, look, Islam is predicting science, therefore it must be true stuff.
Yeah, that was very weird. All those
that was a weird 20-year
See, it says in the Quran all these geological things that have turned out to be true. Well, actually, most of them weren't even true, but even if they were, talk about retrospective.
Absolutely, and it's Saudi government funding. Like there's
there was loads of that with the evolution especially.
There's loads of that. So I remember you dig a little bit into that, and if you actually love science, like the way I loved science, at some point you can't square that circle. So theology, science, morality, the big things. There wasn't really a lot of the issues I faced were not to do with that afterwards. They're all to do with community and stuff. But the initial reasoning was theology and morality. Yeah.
Seifel's back. He has another question. Actually, he was mentioning this to me last week. He said, silly question. For many, many years after being an ex-Muslim, he never ate pork or bacon, largely to feelings of guilt. But he now enjoys a bacon sarnie. Have you enjoyed a bacon sarnie?
I eat pork and bacon, but I actually I've not got the taste in my mouth. It's a boring meat.
The taste.
No, I'm a chicken and beef person, unfortunately. But drinking. I don't drink. I'm known as a not drinker.
You don't, do you? No,
I don't drink. It freaks Muslims and ex-Muslims out both. I've even had some ex-Muslims go, "Are you sure you're ex-Muslim?" Like, I'm like, what does that have to do with theology? But I don't like alcohol. It's an absolutely boring drug. But like alcohol I don't enjoy it. I'm known as that. I'm known as the ex-Muslim that doesn't drink. So.
Has anyone who came, this is an interesting question, actually. I'm interested in the answer to this. Has anyone who came through Faith to Faithless ever returned to their religion? Well, let's deal with that one first, because there's a second question here, but we'll come to that afterwards in the same question. But
not Faith to Faithless, for I know of in ex-Muslim, the grassroots groups, there has been 2 cases of people and they had exceptionally traumatic relationships with their faith, who went back hyper like liberal, like Sufi.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yes. In one case it was someone who's actually transsexual and so super supportive of being transsexual and Muslim. In their case, they were like super supportive of that. And so they didn't go back the way they came in. If that
right, they
sense.
didn't go backwards.
Yeah. Although actually, what's really funny is I think in almost all the cases they've then since left. So it's a really bouncy. It's often to do with just, because it's a difficult thing to leave, and people have different, often people leave and then they realize that theology is a lot wider, even Islamic theology. Like, I'm not an ex-Muslim that thinks all Islamic theology is poor and bad. Like, Islamic theology is very broad and very vast, and there's historical precedents like the Mu'tazili, the rationalists, where there was a lot of interesting Greek philosophy and all that.
Yeah.
So, I can see how if you left your Orthodox faith, but then you find that there's a less Orthodox version, it's not entirely ridiculous that you might be like, oh, maybe, so, but I can count it on my hands. It's very rare.
Especially at difficult times, because if you're inclined to become religious again, you're probably going to go, in many cases, back to the religion that informed your youthful approach to life and your worldview. I mean, this is true in general terms. It's only a very, very tiny minority of people in Britain who convert to a religion other than the one they were raised in.
Exactly.
And that's, that's true of people who are raised religious, but it's also true of people who are raised not religious. But if they convert to religion, it's usually the one of their family background rather than
exactly.
This is not everyone, but it's
what is interesting is I do come across a very tiny but minority of people who become from ex-Muslims to evangelical Christians,
right.
And this happens in America. It's happened a few times here. And it is so insidious how that happens because they're vulnerable.
Yeah.
They need love, and evangelical Christians are all about love, as you can imagine. But I have seen that also end up with them leaving, but it's often because they're put as a figurehead to all the churches, and then eventually they realize, well, wait a second, I'm just doing the things I used to do. So it's but I see a bit of that.
Cypher wants you to know that he likes a gin and tonic. I think the implication is that you might too. So the second part of that...
Well, if he's in London, come take me out for a drink. I'll take you out for a drink, Cycle, anytime.
The second part of the question was, have others noted things that they regretted losing from their religion? So they didn't return to their religion, but there were some things they really, really regretted losing.
Yeah, absolutely. The communal feeling, the world is already quite cold and new. The communities are breaking down a little bit, and it's a bit hard for people if they're out on their own. So you've gone from hyper community to nothing, and you don't have the tools to build new people because you're afraid of everyone. Like Jehovah's Witnesses will say that when they leave, I'm afraid of everyone. So, that's a big thing. I think there's something to be said about other people telling you how to live your morality. I don't know how to explain this. Sometimes that structure is comforting,
Oh, really? That seems very strange to me that would be a comfort rather than
absolutely. It's a fear, and it's both. It's your abusive ex. It's you don't want it, but you come back to it, and so that's why they sometimes ex-Muslims find themselves in other structured political groups or whatever it is.
Right. Communism is the classic.
Communism exactly. Yeah. And it's because structure is nicer. Humanism is scary because humanism is nothing is real. So I think it's really challenging for people. That what else? The rituals is a big one. Like people feel depressed in Eid because they hate the Ramadan because you're fasting for 30 days, but they miss the family and stuff. I love taking everything from everything. So
right, exactly. So I know a lot of former Muslims who'll go and do Eid with their families.
That's what I do. Yeah, exactly. In fact, I would go one step ahead and say, I do Diwali, Eid, Christmas.
Yeah, sure. If it's available, let's have it.
Exactly. I think Humanist UK should do more of that. Actually, it'd be quite fun to do like some secular religious festivals. Anyways, yeah.
Well, there are. I mean, in the US, and they tried to do it in the UK, but never really took off. There is humanistic Judaism, which sort of maintains the rituals and the ethnic community actually in many cases, but the community feeling of Judaism, but in an entirely secular way. It never really took off in the UK. I don't really know why that might be. I suppose because in the UK, religion is a lot more religious than it is in the US, where it is for lots of people very cultural. I mean, I meet American Muslims through work who are
chill.
Exactly, and they're totally not religious in any way. Yeah, it's almost like a cultural marker. Rather than anything else.
Although I would just throw really quickly on that, until your child leaves Islam.
Oh, really? And then suddenly it's unacceptable.
You can be the liberalist father on the planet. Your daughter leaves Islam. You're suddenly like praying 5 times a day, and you're controlling your other kids. Weird output, because people are worried about mortality. They're thinking, oh my God, I'm a bad Muslim. I've done this, so I should be more religious. So just as
we have a billion questions here. Is it easier for men to become apostates than women? That's a short question.
Largely, yes, but weird things sometimes. So, for example, ex-Ultra-Orthodox Jewish people, the women, if they, often, if they have kids, the courts will often find in favor of them.
Yes. Yeah.
Men will be in constant court cases for a lot of years and years and years. So,
well, that's not true of every religion. I mean, there have been religions where it's the opposite. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So, but by and large, I would say yes. Yeah. My experience has been, if I was a girl, it would be harder. Yeah.
How can we make people more aware from an earlier age of the possibility of leaving their religion? We've been working on this, haven't we, to try and introduce apostasy into RE
school speakers. School speakers program. honestly, like kids are all on YouTube. Just more videos of us, like if you're a humanist and you have any kind of social media presence, just doing a little video with an apostate, releasing it out, you will have Muslims who see it. You will have Jehovah's Witnesses who see it. Actually, you speak to Muslims who go from being hyper-religious to becoming less religious, or Muslims who become ex-Muslims. They will often talk about the non-religious person in their life that they were really close friends with, and it was really useful. Now, if that person knew about leaving, that would be quite useful. Does that make sense?
Yes,
so like
does.
just, yeah. So yeah.
Okay, very good. Vanessa, I wanted to ask, do you think there is any part of your personality that's been born out of religious ideas forged during childhood? E.g., Vanessa thinks that they're more non-confrontational because of ideas like turning the other cheek.
Not from a Muslim background.
No, not the precise example, but is there anything that
I have. So
apart
for
from
sure.
not drinking?
No, for sure. So for example, I don't know how to say this. I genuinely believed in the caliphate and the concept that there would be an end of time, then a caliphate and a world order and all that stuff. Now, what that meant is, I wasn't like an extreme in the violence way. I was an extreme in like, this is where the world is going to go, and I want to help that.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I don't believe in that anymore, but that kind of motivation of wanting to do something that's bigger than you and probably slightly crazy is still there with me, and I don't know if that came from Islam or if that's a personality thing, maybe a personality thing, but that's definitely there in me,
and yet you didn't become a communist or some sort of political utopian. No, that's interesting.
Yeah. No, I'm not political utopian, but that's just probably luck in the people I met in my life, really. If I didn't meet humanists, maybe I would have, you never know. I probably not,
gone in a funny way. Maybe.
I hope not. But yeah.
I think you'd have become some sort of weird techie transhumanist, some sort of like.
I was a techie transhumanist.
Oh, were you?
Actually.
Oh, there you go then. Well, we saved from that. Okay, here's a question. It's great that Faith to Faithless covers people leaving all types of high control religions, but the non-Muslim groups, the Hasidic Jews, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses and so on, are relatively small, and therefore the questioner, who's Jeremy, guesses more internally uniform. That's not true of the 3.5 million British Muslims, where there's huge diversity. Is there anything you want to say about that landscape of diversity? Are Muslims from some ethnicities or denominations more or less problematic for apostates for any reasons?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would actually say it's more homogenous than you think. And the way I treat that thought experiment is, think about what would happen if a child left that faith from the different groups. The actual type of abuse that child would face is reasonably even, actually. Like, they would face shunning in the community. They might have some physical violence, but that is the physical violence is where you have different pockets, which is correct. But actually the emotional shunning, the control, those aspects are pretty homogenous in the experience of ex-Muslims in the UK. Different in America, as you were saying, Andrew. I think that is different. But in the UK, it's because apostasy is not a thing. So it's like your child coming out and being a mass murderer, serial killer. Like everyone, no matter how nice of parents you are going to be like, whoa, what the fuck, is going on.
Yeah.
So yeah.
We have more questions here than we can ever answer. They're just pouring in.
I'll power through
No, you can't. We've only got 3 minutes. So one person wonders if apostates are getting younger with social media. They themselves didn't really get a chance to question their religion until much later in life, when they encountered new ideas at university. It was the first time they were outside the home. I suppose the answer is a straight yes, right? Because social media is coming in. Yeah, exactly. There's questions about getting data on apostasy in the UK. Do we need academic research? Do we need PhD students? We've actually started some academic research, and there's been a good PhD begun, isn't there? On
Yep. In fact, the conference that was just done had a whole bunch of sections on it.
Yeah. So I think their recordings, I don't know if the recordings of the Humanists UK and Faith To Faithless conference on apostasy, which was held last week, will be online at any point, but there were some good reports from that. So do have a look at that if you're interested to know more. Lots of questions about the future of Faith To Faithless. We could, what are our plans? Well, they're huge. We've just taken on a new full-time member of staff. We've tripled the budget. There's lots more initiatives like the conference last week, more trainings and so on. So keep your eye on the Humanists UK website and the newsletter. What's one that we could answer just in the end? Safraz Mansour makes a point about the traumatic effects of family shunning as a result, not of apostasy, but of outmarriage, in his case, to a wife from Scotland. Have any comment on that? versus the solidarity of the family, which seems so constricting in the face of any infringement of what they expect. So it's conditional love in a way, is it? Is that what you're experiencing? Conditional
it's
love.
Conditional love. Yeah. And exactly right. It's not always just about kind of faith, but it's conditional love. Yeah. And it's horrible. You're doing this to people you're supposed to love,
Does that make you sad?
Yeah. I mean, just what makes me sad is that this is just stupid. I don't know how to explain it any way better. This is stupid. Like, these religions and religious communities believe that they're correct, which means that you expect there should be choice. And you often say there's choice, but then you make it impossible to leave. It's stupid. It's genuinely stupid. And, I get all these religious people sometimes saying, but why are you calling yourself an ex-Muslim? And da, da, da. It's like, I don't want to do that. I hate the word ex-Muslim. It's a horrible word. But I say to them, and they always shut up after I say this. I say, okay, why don't you do this? Leave Islam publicly for 1 week. Or do it for 1 day. See what happens to you. And they always shut up after that. And they never do it. Not a single Muslim on the planet has ever taken me up on my offer. Do it for 1 week.
Imtiaz, thank you so much for being with us this evening. Just a reminder again of our upcoming events: Francesca Stavrokopoulou on the 7th of October, God and Anatomy; Rumi Hassan on the 21st of October, Modern Europe and the Enlightenment; and our Voltaire lecture on the 22nd of September, The Social Instinct. So until then, goodbye. Thank you again, Imtiaz. Thank you everyone for being with us. Have a lovely evening. Cheerio.